Hey, it's Mrs. Mannix, and I just want to run through these introduction to photosynthesis slides with you really quick. Feel free to fast forward through the parts that you don't need or listen to the whole thing. So, with photosynthesis, the first thing we just want to do is review what photosynthesis is. Photosynthesis can be defined as the conversion of light energy into chemical energy. That's the whole purpose. We want to take the energy from the sun, and then plants are going to use that energy to create chemical energy, which then eventually will be turned into usable energy for the cell. And so it's important to remember that because plants are able to go through the process of photosynthesis, we classify them as autotrophs. On a quick vocab review, autotrophs are organisms that produce their own food compared to heterotrophs, who are organisms that are unable to make their own food and have to consume other organisms to obtain energy. So where photosynthesis came from is it's believed to first evolved in a prokaryotic organism called cyanobacteria. So cyanobacteria were early prokaryotes and they were capable of photosynthesis. And why cyanobacteria were so important in the evolution of life is because since they're able to photosynthesize, a product of photosynthesis is oxygen. And so when those cyanobacteria were going through photosynthesis, they were releasing oxygen into the atmosphere of Earth, which allowed for other life to evolve. So basically, these prokaryotic synthetic organisms were the foundation of eukaryotic photosynthesis that we know and love today. So if you remember anything about photosynthesis from biology, it's probably where it happens. It happens in the chloroplast. So where the chloroplast is actually found, if we get into our plant anatomy, it's found in the mesophyll of leaves. And so what the mesophyll is, it's the cells that make up the interior or the inside leaf tissue. And another vocab word to know about where this takes place is stomata. So what stomata are, they're pores in leaves, kind of similar to the pores in your skin. And what they do is they allow for transport in and out of leaves, specifically the transport of carbon dioxide and oxygen. And so what will happen is those stomata will open and close to allow carbon dioxide to go in to the chloroplast to be broken down, and it allows oxygen to come out. So let's review the structure of a chloroplast. So if we think back to our endosymbiotic theory, we know that chloroplasts are surrounded by a double membrane. And within the chloroplast, there's going to be a fluid called the stroma. And in that stroma, we're going to find thylakoids. Thylakoids is where chlorophyll is going to be contained. And so these thylakoids, people think of them as like photosynthetic stacks. They kind of look like pancakes. When we stack them up, they make a structure called a grana. So with photosynthesis, the equation for photosynthesis you should be familiar with. You have 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 waters plus light is going to yield glucose and oxygen. And then what's happening below is it's just showing you how the reactants are used to make the products. So we can see how the elements in carbon dioxide help make up glucose and oxygen, and as well as water. So what we also have to remember when we're talking about photosynthesis are redox reactions, because one of the key components of photosynthesis is the splitting of water into hydrogen, oxygen, and it also releases some electrons, as we'll find out later. And so what this splitting of water is called is a redox reaction. And redox reactions are reactions that involve either a complete or a partial transfer of electrons from one reactant to another. So what's specifically happening in photosynthesis with a redox reaction is the electrons get transferred with the hydrogen ions from water, and they go to carbon dioxide, which reduces it to sugar. So let's do a quick chem review. So remember what redox reactions are. So we can have an oxidation reaction, which is a loss of electrons, or we can have a reduction reaction, which is a gaining of electrons. So you can see in the photosynthesis equation that carbon dioxide is reduced to glucose, meaning that those electrons are gained, where water is oxidized, meaning it loses electrons, and then the product that comes out of it is oxygen. This will all make sense later when we talk about light-dependent reactions. So there's two parts to photosynthesis. We have the light reactions, which are also referred to as light-dependent reactions, and the Calvin cycle, or light-independent reactions. You'll hear those terms interchangeable. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do an overview of the light reactions or the light-dependent reactions today. But before we can do that, we have to just quickly review light. And so it's important to remember that light is made up of energy called photons, and that light travels in waves. And so what we're focusing on is the visible light spectrum. And when we're looking at that visible light spectrum, it's important to remember that short wavelengths have a higher energy than longer wavelengths. And when light interacts with matter, it can interact in three ways. It can be reflected, transmitted, and absorbed. And so with photosynthesis, there's different pigments, and their job is to absorb light. And so when they absorb that light, that's when we're like harvesting the energy from the sun. But the color that we see in plants is wavelengths being reflected. So your example is leaves appear green because chlorophyll, the main pigment in photosynthesis, is going to absorb the violet and blue light as well as red, and it reflects green light. So just a quick overview of the different pigments found in photosynthesis. We talk a lot about chlorophyll, but technically chlorophyll, there's two types. There's chlorophyll A, which is the primary pigment. This is what's going to be used in our light reactions. And then we have chlorophyll B, which is an accessory pigment, meaning it's aiding in photosynthesis, but chlorophyll A is doing most of the work. So chlorophyll A is a blue-green pigment, or chlorophyll B is a yellow-green pigment. We also have carotenoids. So carotenoids are another yellow-orange pigment, and so what they do is they just kind of help broaden the spectrum of colors that drive photosynthesis. So it just gives us more ways to absorb light. Quick review, if a photon of which color light would contain more energy, yellow at 590 nanometers or purple at 410. So the purple wavelength would have more energy because shorter wavelengths have more energy. And hopefully by now, you know the difference between heterotrophs and autotrophs. Heterotrophs are consumers, organisms that have to obtain their food from other organisms, and autotrophs are producers. They're able to make their own food. So, like I said, what we're going to do is just review or do an overview of light reactions. We'll get more into the details next class. So with light reactions, where they occur is inside the chloroplast in the thylakoid membrane. And remember, thylakoids are those green circular discs that you're seeing within the chloroplast. And specifically in the thylakoid, this is happening in a region called photosystems. And there's two photosystems, which we'll get to in a second. And the whole goal of light reactions is we want to convert our solar energy into chemical energy. So like your Pogel stated, the chloroplasts were the original solar panels. It's taking energy from the sun and converting it into chemical energy in the form of ATP and NADPH. So like I just said, the chemical energy that we're creating in light reactions are NADPH and ADP, which are going to be used to power the second part of photosynthesis, the Calvin cycle. And how the cell creates these two forms of energy from light energy is by exciting electrons. So that light is going to be absorbed, or those photons are going to be absorbed by our two photosystems, photosystem 2 and photosystem 1, which causes electrons to become excited and move down the electron transport chain. So how specifically does this work? So chlorophyll within the thylakoid is going to absorb a photon of light. When it does that, electrons get excited. So they go from their ground state to their excited state. But the problem is an excited electron is really unstable and it wants to fall back into its ground state. So as this electron is moving down the electron transport chain, it's releasing energy. And that energy from when the electron is moving from its excited state to its ground state is really important in the overall production of ATP. So with these photosystems, they're just the reaction center. Their job is to capture light and excite electrons. So within the photosystem, we're going to have that chlorophyll. It's going to capture the light, but there's also going to be an electron acceptor. So when that chlorophyll captures the light and excites the electron acceptor takes that electron, is going to move it down the electron transport chain. There's also light capturing complexes, which I was just talking about as chlorophyll. So they're the pigments associated with the proteins. And so sometimes we'll think of them as like the antenna for the reaction center. It's saying, hey, light, come in, I'm ready to go. And so we'll talk about like what all of these different parts in this diagram mean in the second day when we go more in detail with light dependent reactions or light reactions. So like I said before, the thylakoid membrane, there's two photosystems, photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. And they're named in the order of their discovery. So photosystem 2 was discovered first, so that's what comes first in the process of photosynthesis. So within photosystem 2, the reaction center is referred to as P680 because it absorbs light at 680 nanometers, where photosystem 1, its reaction center is P700 because you guessed it, it absorbs light at 700 nanometers. So that's where we're going to stop for today. Just want to give you a brief overview of the different reactions in photosynthesis, the light dependent, which we kind of did just the basics. And we're going to get more into the details of how these photosystems work along with the electron transport chains to capture light and turn it into chemical energy in our next lecture. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions.